Hello and welcome to this video on ethical considerations. So in this video we're going to look at how a business may take into account ethical issues before deciding whether to trade internationally or expand internationally. So that's a quick reminder, what do we mean by ethics within business? Well, we mean ethical concerns are actions which can be assessed as either right or wrong by reference to moral principles. So is this a morally right or wrong thing to do? So ethics can influence a number of decisions that a business might take. In particular there, the first one, the location decision, and this can also apply to whether to take part in international trade, perhaps through offshoring or outsourcing. This ties in as well with the topic that we looked at, a corporate social responsibility. So the extent to which a business addresses the concerns and obligations to its wider stakeholders, including also the actions a business might take over and above the minimum required by law in addressing societal needs and wants. So we're going to look here at 5 different types of ethical consideration: the impact on stakeholders, pay and working conditions, environmental considerations, our supply chain, and finally marketing considerations. So let's start off with stakeholders. A reminder that stakeholders are those people who are interested in or affected by the decisions or actions of a business. And these stakeholders might want different things. For example, employees will want good, fair rewards, basic pay, and perhaps other financial incentives, as well as job security and a number of other things. And so when trading internationally, a business might consider whether it's appropriate to adopt a stakeholder influenced approach, in which the stakeholder takes responsibility towards all of its stakeholders. So the business must consider all its stakeholders in its decision. So for example, it might consult with stakeholders before deciding whether to expand internationally. Once there, it must treat stakeholders fairly, so paying suppliers in the foreign country, fair pay to any workers in that foreign country. But again, the question is, does it need to be fair by our own country standards or fair by the legal standards in the country, or is there some ethical consideration that we need to view this issue through? Another issue might be pay and rewards. So again, this can create a significant ethical issue. For example, in financial services, we have this strong idea of the bonus culture. And driven by the incentive of large bonuses, do management cut corners or break the walls? So is the way in which we're rewarding or paying potentially overseas firms to produce for us actually going to create an incentive here for them to cut corners in terms of working conditions and stuff like that? We might also consider this concept of the fat cat. Is it ethical that chief executives should be paid hundreds of times more than the average employee of their business, perhaps operating in another country? For example, this article on the right-hand side here shows that the top executives get paid in just 3 days, the first 3 days of the year, what it takes the average worker to get paid in an entire year. Another ethical consideration will be the working conditions. So many multinational companies or their subcontractors have been accused of providing poor working conditions for employees when when offshoring or outsourcing is used. Quite often we talk about sweatshop conditions, and this is a pejorative term or a general term for a workplace that has very poor, socially unacceptable working conditions. Some examples here: Apple in China recently was accused of providing poor working conditions, although it was actually outsourcing to a company called Foxconn. Here's another example of expensive Italian shoes made for very low pay in Eastern European sweatshops. Migrant workers are sometimes vulnerable to human rights abuses as well. So there's a story here about a majority of companies are unaware of how parts of their supply chain could be vulnerable to serious human rights abuses. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is environmental considerations. Many multinational companies or their subcontractors can be accused of trading internationally to bypass perhaps stricter regulations for environmental areas that they face at home. They can also be criticised for the additional carbon footprint that international trade and a global supply chain can produce. Perhaps a couple of well-known examples: the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico and the Volkswagen emission scandal. And on the top right here, the amount of damage it's estimated that multinationals do to the environment each year. There are also considerations for how firms are behaving within our supply chain. So is there any exploitation of labour? The International Labour Organization, the ILO, argue that it's the responsibility of multinational companies to ensure that workers are treated fairly throughout the entire supply chain, even if they're the employees of another business who are outsourcing work to. There have also been instances of the use of child labour, so low wages, unacceptable conditions, no education, sometimes even kidnapping, and effectively almost working as slaves. So an example here, Primark has been criticised for some of the companies they buy their clothes from employing children. These are also some famous brands that have been caught out using child labour or sweatshops. Naughty. The final ethical consideration is about marketing considerations. So in the UK, we have the Trade Descriptions Act, but this is not necessarily applicable in other countries. So certain industries, for example, food and pharmaceutical companies, there have been instances where multinational companies have been misleading in terms of how they've labelled their product. For example, the bottom right here, Nurofen didn't fully identify what the contents of their painkillers were, and the Coca-Cola here were advertising, marketing in a country that suggested that their soda was made from apples when it wasn't, it was sweeteners. Often pressure groups and consumer organisations such as watchdogs will pursue these companies to try and make sure they don't produce any misleading information. They might also be criticised for inappropriate promotional activities, for example, promoting directly to children, maybe not understanding the cultural differences, and promoting a lifestyle that goes against cultural or religious difference. So it's important that a business takes this into account. So in this video, we've come across a range of different ethical considerations that a business might have to consider how they manage when deciding whether to trade internationally. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.